In this video, we are going to be looking into the navigation and the interface. The very first thing we need to do is we need to go to Edit, Preferences, Navigation, and enable Lock to World Up Under Orbit. Strictly speaking, not necessary, but without this one, I go absolutely crazy. Let me show you what I mean. If this is disabled, you are going to get off axis at all times. So you're just going to get in trouble all the time. So I highly recommend you lock this one to up. Otherwise, you are just going to have a really bad time navigating in Mari. So Preferences, Navigation, Lock to World Up, and hit OK. Now, with that out of the way, let's look at how we can actually navigate. The way we rotate is Alt and left mouse button. I'm using a tablet, and Mari works very well with both a tablet and a mouse. You zoom by Alt, Control, and then drag, or simply Alt and right mouse button drag. This is entirely down to personal preference. And you pan with Alt and Shift and left mouse button, or simply middle mouse button and drag. I'm personally preferring to use middle mouse button and drag. You can see down here what I'm using. So it's entirely up to you. So Alt, left mouse button, Alt, right mouse button, and Alt, middle mouse button. This is a navigation that should be very familiar from Maya. At the very top of the interface, we have a lot of different settings. Truth be told, you're not going to be spending too much time within this menu, but it's still really useful that it's here. Some settings, for instance, could be under View Display, and this is where we can change a lot of things about your general interface. I recommend not fiddling around with this too much here. One thing you might do, for instance, is enabling or disabling the grid. So you can just go under View, Display Properties, and Grid. I always disable this one because I don't find any purpose in having this enabled. But there are tons of other options here as well that you can check out in your own time. We are not going to be messing around with this too much. But essentially every single setting that you need is going to be under this very top menu, like File, Save, or Quit. But you can see there are hotkeys for everything. We can go under Edit, and here we have Preferences where we just went. We can go under Selections, and here we have all sorts of settings. So I do recommend using the selection one. Objects is something we aren't really going to be using a whole lot out of. So this one isn't that relevant. Channel is relevant. This is where you have tons of settings relating to channels. But like in any good interface, you can find this in multiple places. So you have channels here, but you also have channels over here. So you have a lot of corresponding settings over here, and this is where I spend most of my time in this interface as well. A little tip that we aren't going to be exploring in this series due to limitations of technology is using two monitors. I do recommend using two monitors for Mari and then setting your tablet so it works on both screens at the same time, because the interface can honestly get quite cluttered. So I do recommend using two monitors, but I obviously can't show you my setup for that because I'm just recording a single monitor at the moment, and we are just going to be working with a single monitor for this entire course. On the left, we have general tools. So here we have the selection tool. If you click on it and hold down, you can see there are additional tools under it if there is a triangle here. So we can see here we can do select or transform select objects. You never really want to use that one too much, to be honest, but select is very useful. The hotkey for that is S. See down here, the hotkey for that. Then we have additional tools like the paint, the roll or blur. Paint is something you're going to be using a lot. Then we have additional tools like paint through, which is what you are going to be using if you are using images to project. Projecting images in Mari is brilliant. Then we have general transform tools for the images. So here we have warp, slurp, which is more like a liquify tool, pinup and toe brush. Then we have general selection tools as well for this. And we have the color picker. Then we have the select a color. So here you can select any one of the different colors. There's so many options inside of Mari here. You can, for instance, just put an image if you want to. So the color tool is very powerful. You also have, this is the front and the foreground and background color. You can just swap this right here as well. And like in Photoshop, the hotkey is just X for swapping these two. Then we have general selection modes here. This is where we can either select the object. In this case, we need to, of course, have the selection tool enabled. In this case, we only have one object, and we can verify by going under objects. And you can see right here, there's only one object. Then we can set this to be patch mode, which is what I stick to most of the time. Remember how we set up the UVs in Maya before? This is all based on selection. So now we can just select the various parts based on that. In this case, you can see it's a little bit clumsy because the ears are selecting. It's like the ear selects this as well, and selecting the other side selects. It's just a little bit clumsy how this is set up, but this is totally fine for the purposes of this. This is exactly what I was talking about when it comes to testing out your UV map, where this is probably something I would have fixed this if this was more a serious project for me and not just a personal one. Then we can go under face mode, and this is where you are selecting individual faces. If you go up in the top toolbar here, you can see that this changes based on the tool you have enabled. So for instance, under the selection tool, you have multiple options right here as well. So you can change this to different modes. So really useful for selecting different things. But of course, we have separate chapters for all these tools. This is just to cover the overall interface. Then we have the general view, like what are you seeing? So this can be the current channel, so you're only seeing that. We don't really have any painted data here yet, so this is just going to be a flat, boring white object at the moment, but this is where you can change the current channel. This is where it gets a bit weird when it comes to layers, because we aren't really using layers anymore in Mari. This is more of a legacy thing. Currently, it's going to be all using nodes. So generally, you'll probably be using current channel or user shader, which is going to be using the actual shader, which we set up in the previous chapter. Remember how we set this to you be using the Arnold AI standard surface? That's that. And then here you can go between flat, where you just see the flat, you can see basic, or you can see the full shader as well. Often you want to just go between these ones, and that's why they have hotkeys. So F1 to F3, so F1, F2, and F3. Really useful to just toggle between these two. So very nice and easy. Then we have symmetry painting. Now, if we are in the paint tool, just the hotkey P, we can just paint here now, and you can see that we get some nice symmetry, and this gets baked instantly. Why is that? Well, that is the paint buffer that we have a whole chapter dedicated to. So this is a bit different than other software. You see we rotate, and now it gets baked instantly. So really cool feature, but it does require a bit of explanation. And then we have local symmetry painting as well. So the painting up here, this is based on the model, and this one here is based on just the paint buffer itself. So this is all local. And then we have a button here for clearing the paint buffer. More on that later. You can also change the viewport from being in ortho to being in perspective by going up to the different tabs here. In this case, we have perspective. Let me just switch this to the full shader as well, but just by hitting the F3 key. You can see down here all the hotkeys. And now we can go to perspective or ortho, but you don't really have to use the tabs if you want to. You can go over here as well, and here you see you have a icon that looks very ortho, and you have one that looks a bit perspective. So this just toggles between these two as well. This actually changes the viewport itself from a ortho to a perspective one. I usually texture in ortho, to be honest. This is just entirely down to personal preference. I find I have a bit more control in this manner because I can see a bit more of the model, but that's entirely down to personal preference. If you do prefer to stick with perspective, you have options here, for instance, for the near plane, the far plane, and then you have the field of view as well. So you can adjust this to fit your specific field of view in something like Maya or Blender, wherever you are painting. You can switch between the different views as well if you are in ortho by using the hotkeys 1, 2, 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And you can just break this any point by just rotating around. So that's a very handy way of just going into the ortho views. You just get used to which one is which after a while. You don't really have to memorize them. You just basically just toggle between these ones here. And again, just rotate around to get back to a non-side view or front view or any one of the snapped view like that. In the top right, we have a few options as well. In addition to the ortho and the perspective view, we have wireframe, which is quite obvious what that's allowing you to do. Normally I paint without wireframe, but it can be really handy sometimes to have wireframe enabled. You can more easily see exactly what's going on in terms of the model. So this can be quite useful. So without and with, you can just see a bit more of what's going on. Then we have the UV renderings. This only makes sense if we go to the UV view, and now you can see what happens when we do this or not. You can see this, if wireframe is on, you can see what happens. So this is going to show the whole texture map behind this one, because it's going to be bleeding around, or if it just shows this one here. So here you can see that when we're painting something here, it's going to be bleeding across all the way out as much as it can. Then we have this one, which is going to be showing you the UV map or not. So this is a very easy way to see the actual texture map without the UVs on top. So this is quite useful. You can also use the UV and ortho one as well. This is very handy in certain cases where you want to see the, let's say you want to paint something around the eyes here, and it's just hard to actually get to this in the viewport here for whatever reason. Then you can just go in here and you can just paint, and you can see this updating in here. So the UV and the ortho view like this is very, very useful in certain cases. Though, like I said, I do prefer to stick with this one, and I prefer to use this without the wireframe enabled. If you want to customize the interface, you can do this in a bunch of different ways as well. Mari is quite powerful when you want to customize your interface. One of the easiest ways would be to right-click on the interface, and now you can say here, for instance, that you don't want to see the project menu, you don't want to see the tools palette, so you can see the tools just all disappeared now. You don't want to see navigation down here. This can be a very effective way to remove clutter from the interface, because like I said, the Mari interface can get quite cluttered, particularly when you work in all these different ones here. So it can get quite confusing when you're dealing with this kind of stuff. You can see how much stuff is actually happening here. We have tabs everywhere and you have different menus. So this can be a quite useful way of doing this. One thing you might want to enable is the view transform on the bottom. This is the general color space one. So here you can enable and disable the color space. You can change the exposure up and down. You can hit this button here to increase the exposure, and you can hit the R key to reset this one as well. You can also change the gamma right here as well, and go over to the R and just reset this one. If you see an R button, this is always going to be a reset button. In this case, we are just going to hide the view transforms, and we are just going to reset the interface, because now I completely messed this up. The way we can reset the interface is by going to view and then default layout, and then we get back to the default layout. If you want to customize the interface even further, you can also move and delete these various UI elements. So for instance, if you just want to remove the layers, you can just click the little X here. Most likely we are not going to be dealing too much with layers, simply because that's more of a legacy feature. They are powerful to some degree, but nodes have really taken over, and the future of Mari is node based. So one way we can do this, for instance, is we can move the nodes from here. Just take this whole thing and move it over here. This is where I prefer to keep it, so we can just move it in here, and then we can just expand this one here, so we have more control with that. We also have the node properties we can put up here as well. So now you can just see that we have the nodes, and then we have the node properties. We're going to be customizing this further later on. This is more just an example to show you how you can work with this. So we can, for instance, move this down here, and now we have the nodes and we have node properties. So if you want to change the bake here, for instance, or the basically the merge, you can just very easily do that just by having this here. So we can very easily move things around, and this is where you can also enable a second monitor as well. So if you, for instance, want the channels to be on a second monitor, or maybe the nodes, you can just take the node graph and you can just move the whole thing out like so. And because this might just take up a bit more space. This is something that if you were using nodes before, this just takes up a fair bit of space. We're not going to show you a proper layout here, because again, we only have one monitor, but you can take all of this and just move this to another monitor. So now you have a lot more space to work with. If you are using a tablet, you will of course have to change the tablet to work with two monitors as well. This takes a bit of time to get used to, but once you get used to that, it's totally fine. It just takes a little bit of time to actually get used to. What you can also do, you can delete all of these ones here, and then you have a bit more real estate. And then one way to work with this, if you want to change the lights, for instance, you can go in here, you can just change the lights, and you just get up the menus as you see them fit, and then they fade afterwards. So image manager, you can just add your images here, and then it fades when you aren't using this. You can also pin this as well, so that this stays open like this, which makes this a little bit easier to work with. And then of course you can just make this into a floating window, and you can put this anywhere, including at the top and in the bottom as well. So tons of ways of dealing with this. There is no one correct way of dealing with the interface, particularly now that there are nodes as well. So a lot of these palettes here that you might have traditionally used in layers are not going to be something that you're going to be sticking too much with. Docking it like this as well is very useful, because now you can just move this in, and we can just dock it around. So once you find an interface that you like, let's say you really enjoy this interface, you can go to View, Save Layout, and you can just save this out as an actual file. You can share this with other people, and you can load this in the future as well. And that's it for the interface and navigation.